Nailed into the trunk of an oak tree at a gravel crossroads in the North Carolina mountains hang the broken pieces of motorcycles, shattered fairings, bent forks, a helmet split down the middle. Riders call it the Tree of Shame, and it has stood at the southern entrance to U.S. Route 129 since the 1980s, a running tally in scrap metal of everyone who came to this road overconfident and left it on a stretcher, or worse. The road it guards is 11 miles long. In those 11 miles, there are 318 curves. That works out to a curve roughly every 180 feet for 11 uninterrupted miles through some of the steepest, most densely forested terrain in the southern Appalachians. This is the story of how that road came to exist, why it has killed people almost every single year for the past 2 decades, and what happens the moment a driver stops respecting it. Locals call it the Dragon. Officially, it is U.S. Route 129, and depending on which side of the state line you are standing on, it goes by 2 other names as well. Topeka Road in North Carolina, Calderwood Highway in Tennessee. It runs along the southwestern border of Great Smoky Mountains National Park, cutting through the Cherokee National Forest on the Tennessee side and the Nantahala National Forest on the North Carolina side, from a crossroads called Deals Gap to a boat ramp on Chilhowie Lake, a few miles from the historic community of Chilhowie, Tennessee. There are no houses on it, no driveways, no traffic lights, no stop signs, no intersections of any kind for its entire length. If you want to picture what that actually means, picture a road built with only one purpose in mind, and that purpose was never you. Before we get into why this road has earned a nickname like a dragon, I want to know something. If you're watching this from somewhere near the Smokies, or if you've actually put your own tires on these 318 curves, tell us in the comments, because I want to hear what it was really like down there. And if channels like this one, ones that go looking for the documented, verifiable story behind the roads everybody's afraid of, are your kind of thing, this is a good moment to subscribe. Because we're about to get into exactly why the Dragon has earned its reputation. Back to the road. The road exists because of aluminum, not automobiles. In 1909, engineers working for the Aluminum Company of America, Alcoa, began surveying the Little Tennessee River watershed for hydroelectric power sites. Alcoa needed enormous amounts of electricity to run its aluminum smelting operations back in Blount County, Tennessee, and the river's steep drop through this stretch of mountains was exactly what the company's engineers were looking for. Under the direction of an Alcoa engineer named Isaac Glidden Calderwood, the company built a chain of dams up the river. Cheoah Dam, finished in 1919, Santitla Dam, finished in 1928, and Calderwood Dam, finished in 1930. Each new dam drowned another stretch of the single rail line that had been the only way in and out of the gorge, and each time, the crews building the next dam upstream needed a new way to move equipment and supplies past the flooded section. The eventual answer was a highway. What is now U.S. 129 was pushed through the gorge and completed to Deals Gap in 1931, following the valley of 20 Mile Creek, threading between the river on one side and a wall of rising mountain on the other, in large part because that was the route Cherokee trails had already worn into these ridgelines centuries earlier. Tunneling through the mountains or grading them flat was, at the time, simply too expensive. So, the road bent around every contour the land offered, not for scenic effect, but because the terrain gave the engineers no other option. For decades afterward, almost nobody drove it for fun. It was a working road, used by dam crews, loggers, and the small number of families living in company towns like Calderwood. which Alcoa built in 1912 to house the men constructing and maintaining the dams. At its peak, Calderwood had its own school, its own church, and enough workers and dependents to fill a small neighborhood along the river. It stayed occupied by dam maintenance crews into the 1960s, but once the major construction work wound down, the houses were eventually razed. Only a handful of structures remain today: the old dam service building, the schoolhouse, and a converted Quonset hut that once served as the community's movie theater, all now recognized on the National Register of Historic Places. Traffic on the through road barely changed until the 1990s, when word started spreading through the motorcycle community about an 11-mile stretch of pavement with no cross streets, no driveways, and no through traffic to worry about. A writer named Doug Snavely helped popularize it through a newsletter he ran with a motel and diner at Deals Gap. A couple named Ron and Nancy Johnson opened a shop near mile marker 9 to sell souvenirs to riders who wanted proof they had survived it. Hollywood had already found the road decades earlier. It appears in the 1958 film Thunder Road, the 1971 cult classic Two-Lane Blacktop, the 1993 thriller The Fugitive, and the 1999 film In Dreams. But it was the internet era, and that first souvenir shop that turned US 129 into an international pilgrimage site. By the early 2000s, the road had a nickname, a growing tourist economy, and a rising body count. Here is the part that matters if you actually want to understand why the Dragon is dangerous, rather than simply being told that it is. 318 curves in 11 miles is not just a lot of turns. It means the road almost never gives a driver a straightaway long enough to fully relax, recover from a small mistake, or see very far ahead. The curves are not spaced out with rest in between. They are continuous, a constant linked sequence of bends typically taken at 25 to 35 miles an hour, one flowing directly into the next. Many of them are blind, hidden behind rock outcroppings or cresting a rise at exactly the point where a driver most needs to see oncoming traffic. Several sections are off-camber, banked the wrong way in precisely the spot where a rider's instinct tells them the pavement should be tilting to help them, not against them. The dense tree canopy that makes the drive so scenic also keeps long stretches of asphalt shaded and damp well after rain has cleared everywhere else nearby, so the road can be bone dry at one curve and slick with runoff at the very next one. In autumn, wet fallen leaves turn sections of pavement into something closer to ice than asphalt. In winter, the higher elevations near Deals Gap, the road climbs to nearly 2,000 feet at points, with a net elevation change of several hundred feet from one end to the other, can ice over entirely. And because there are essentially no shoulders, no runoff areas, and steep embankments dropping straight toward the river on one side for long stretches, there is very little room for a small mistake to correct itself before it becomes something else entirely. On most roads, a rider who drifts a few feet wide has a shoulder, a gravel margin, some forgiveness built into the design. On the Dragon, a few feet wide can mean the center line, oncoming traffic, or the edge of a drop. Picture yourself dropping into it from the Tennessee side near Chilhowee Lake. The lake falls away behind you, the trees close in overhead, and within a few hundred feet, the road has already turned twice. Your headlights, on an overcast day under that canopy, barely reach much past the next bend before it disappears behind rock. There is no rumble strip warning you the shoulder is gone because there is no shoulder to lose. There is only the double yellow line, the wall of forest on either side, and whatever is coming the other way that you cannot yet see. You settle into a rhythm of 25, maybe 35 miles an hour. Lean, straighten, lean again. Because the road never actually lets you go faster than that for long. The curves arrive too quickly, one folding directly into the next, so that the entire 11 miles feels less like a highway and more like a single continuous turn that happens to last 20 minutes. The culture that grew up around that experience is as real as the road itself. Helmets are legally required for every rider and every passenger in both North Carolina and Tennessee. No exceptions for age or experience. Peak season runs from April through October, with locals recommending May and October in particular for cooler temperatures, drier pavement, and depending on the month, either spring wildflowers or fall color lighting up the ridgelines. Weekends bring the heaviest traffic, both motorcycles and sports cars, enough that experienced drivers plan their runs for early weekday mornings instead. At the southern end, the Deals Gap Motorcycle Resort has anchored the community for decades. The same building that operated for years as the Moody's store, then the Craftons, then Max Motel, then the Crossroads of Time, before settling into its current identity. A few miles down the North Carolina side, at Tapoco, Alcoa built a lodge in 1930, originally meant as a retreat for its own executives, complete with a golf course. Today, it still operates as a hotel for the riders and drivers who come through. In the early 2000s, a local rider who went by the name Killboy began setting up along the curves with a camera, believing the spirit of the road could be captured in a single frame, and started selling photographs of riders mid-lean back to the riders themselves. That business is still running today, and on any given weekend you'll find photographers stationed at several points along the 11 miles, capturing the same curves that statistically will put someone in the hospital or the morgue before the season ends. None of this softens what the road actually does to people. If anything, the road's own fame has become part of the danger. A large share of the riders who show up at Deals Gap on a given weekend are visiting for the first time, drawn from out of state by exactly the reputation this video is describing, eager to slay the dragon on unfamiliar pavement they've only ever seen in videos. Locals who ride the road every week know precisely which curves tighten unexpectedly and which ones hide gravel after a storm. A rider who has never seen the road before does not, and on a road with this little margin for error, that gap in local knowledge is itself a risk factor the statistics don't separate out. The danger sits directly next to a thriving, decades-old tourist economy, riders posing for photographs at the 3-18 curve sign a few hours after paramedics have cleared a wreck from the very same stretch of pavement. That is the shape of the road laid out plainly. What follows is what that shape has actually done to real people, in cases where names, dates, and outcomes are all a matter of public record. The Blount County Sheriff's Office, which patrols the Tennessee side, keeps a comparison on its own public safety materials, and it may be the single starkest way to understand what these 11 miles actually cost. Over one 10-year period, the Sheriff's Office recorded 27 motorcycle deaths on the Dragon. In that same span of years, the rest of Blount County, more than 1,100 miles of roads in total, recorded 23 motorcycle deaths. 11 miles killed more riders than 1,100. Those numbers are not abstractions filed away in a records room somewhere. They are attached to specific dates, specific mile markers, and specific people who woke up on an ordinary morning with no idea it would be their last one. The individual cases behind that comparison are what actually explain how it happens. In October of 2018, a rider named Henry Turner Jr., 44 years old, from Valdosta, Georgia, was riding through one of the Dragon's curves in Blount County around midday. According to the sheriff's office, he lost control in the turn, left the roadway, and fell 30 feet down an embankment. He was wearing a DOT-approved helmet. He died at the scene. Investigators later noted the possibility that a medical event occurred either just before or during the crash, though that detail was never confirmed in the public record. Riders who knew him described someone who was careful, experienced, and not the type to push his limits, which is part of why his death unsettled people who ride the road regularly as much as it did. The dragon does not only punish recklessness. Sometimes it only asks for a single bad half-second from anyone, regardless of skill. 3 years later, in June of 2021, an 18-year-old from Maryville, Tennessee, named Luke Hutzel was riding north on US 129 in the early evening, just before 7 o'clock. Troopers say he crossed the center line and collided head-on with a motorcyclist traveling the other way. Hutzel died at the scene. His mother, Lisa, told local reporters afterward that he had found his calling early in life, that he was a careful rider, and that she had no regrets about letting him ride, even knowing how it ended. Around that same time, Tennessee Highway Patrol figures showed at least 13 deaths on the Dragon over the preceding 5 years alone. Hutzel's crash represents the one hazard this road's design cannot forgive under any circumstances: a driver drifting even briefly across that double yellow line into a lane occupied by somebody who did everything right. Not every fatal crash on the Dragon involves rider error at all. In the spring of 2026, a motorcyclist named Jeremy A. Gambrell, 52 years old, was riding his 2006 Harley-Davidson in the very early morning hours, just past 12:30, when a deer entered the roadway ahead of him. He struck the animal, left the road, and came to an uncontrolled rest along the shoulder. He was wearing a helmet. He did not survive. It is a reminder that a road this narrow, bordered by dense national forest on both sides for its entire length, does not only threaten riders through their own mistakes. Wildlife moves through that corridor constantly, day and night, and on a road with this little margin for a sudden, unplanned swerve, an animal stepping into the wrong curve at the wrong moment can be just as fatal as a missed apex. The deadliest kind of crash on the Dragon, though, is the one that takes more than one life at a time. In May of 2026, Tennessee Highway Patrol responded to a crash near mile marker 5 involving a Harley-Davidson trike carrying 2 riders. According to the preliminary report, the driver, 59-year-old Eduardo Falcone of Florida, was traveling south when he failed to maintain his lane while taking a sharp curve. The trike left the roadway, struck an embankment, and came to rest partially in the opposing lane of travel. Falcone and his passenger, 55-year-old Mariano Maldonado, also of Florida, both died from their injuries. Troopers confirmed both men were wearing helmets at the time. It was the first fatal crash of the year on the Dragon, a season that, by then, had become almost ritual in its grimness. Riders arrive every spring in growing numbers, drawn from every part of the country, and within weeks, somebody does not make it back to Deal's Gap. If you're finding these details as unsettling as I do putting them together, that's exactly why this channel exists. We build every one of these episodes out of documented sourced cases, not guesswork or forum rumors. If that's worth something to you, subscribing helps more than you'd think. Now, back to what these 4 crashes actually have in common. 4 names, 4 different years, spanning nearly a decade. 4 different mechanisms behind the wheel, or the handlebars. A solo loss of control on a curve. A head-on collision after drifting across the center line. A wildlife strike that gave a rider no time to react. And a 2-up trike that could not hold its line through a sharp bend. And yet every single one of these crashes shares the exact same underlying condition. A road that offers almost no margin for error, wrapped tightly around blind curves, uneven camber, and drop-offs. in a place where cell coverage disappears for long stretches and help can be many minutes away even after someone calls for it. The broader numbers back up exactly what these individual stories suggest. In 2019 alone, the Tennessee side of the Dragon recorded 93 crashes, roughly two-thirds of them involving motorcycles, and 4 fatalities, 3 of them riders. North Carolina's much shorter portion of the road, less than a mile of the 11 total, logged 10 crashes that same year. Between 2020 and 2021, Tennessee authorities recorded 165 crashes on their stretch of the road, 123 of them involving motorcycles. Over the 5 years leading up to 2019, more than 450 crashes were recorded on the Dragon in total. By 2024, the 11-mile Tennessee section alone saw 112 crashes, involving 139 vehicles, 47 injuries, and 5 deaths, while North Carolina reported 17 crashes on its short portion, 8 of them serious injury collisions, roughly half involving motorcycles. According to figures cited by local news outlets in the spring of 2026, the sheriff's office put the total number of deaths on the Dragon at 19 since 2021 alone. Speaking to reporters during a joint safety campaign in the summer of 2024, Tennessee Highway Patrol Lieutenant Russell Smith put it in blunt terms. Troopers had worked 16 serious injury crashes on the road in 2023. 14 of them involving motorcycles, and by that point in 2024 alone, they had already worked 3 fatal crashes. Numbers like that are exactly why North Carolina's governor's highway safety program and Tennessee's own highway patrol now coordinate directly across the state line. Rather than treating the Dragon as 2 separate, unrelated jurisdictions that happen to share a stretch of pavement, none of this has slowed the road down, and it likely never will. Roughly 250,000 riders make the pilgrimage to Deals Gap every year, according to regional tourism figures, drawn by the exact same reputation that kills a handful of them. Law enforcement on both sides of the state line now treats the Dragon less like an ordinary rural highway and more like a recurring seasonal public safety event. The Blount County Sheriff's Office and Tennessee Highway Patrol run awareness campaigns every spring, station patrol units along the straighter sections near the Little Tennessee River and at the Tabcat Creek Bridge, and coordinate impaired and reckless driving enforcement with North Carolina authorities across the state line. Tractor trailers have been barred from the route entirely because there simply is not enough room for a vehicle that size to take some of these curves without crossing into oncoming traffic. Officers who work the road every riding season have described their goal in blunt terms, not to eliminate the danger which is built into the mountains themselves, but to reduce how often a rider's own choices turn that built-in danger into a fatality. That mission runs through every warm month of the year now, not just holiday weekends, because the crash data makes clear there is no genuinely safe season on the Dragon, only degrees of risk that shift slightly with the weather, the traffic, and how many first-time visitors happen to be on the road on a given day. The road hasn't changed, and it really can't. The same steep, folded terrain that forced Alcoa's engineers to build it this way in 1931 is still there, hemming the pavement in on both sides, and rerouting it now would mean rebuilding an entirely new road through protected national forest and along the boundary of a national park. The scenic stops that draw people in the first place are still there too. The Calderwood Overlook near mile marker 9, looking out over the reservoir and the 1930 dam that helped bring this road into existence in the first place, and Fontana Dam, a short drive beyond the North Carolina end, rising 480 feet into the air, the tallest dam east of the Rocky Mountains. Tourists still pull off to take photographs, Photographers still set up folding chairs along the sharpest bends every weekend, selling riders pictures of themselves mid-lean for a few dollars apiece. The named corners are still named, and still spoken of with a kind of gallows humor by the people who ride them. Copperhead Corner, Hog Pen Bend, Wheelie Hell, Gravity Cavity, Break or Bust Bend. Names given by a community that keeps coming back to a road that keeps taking some of them. Back at that gravel lot at Deals Gap, the tree of shame keeps growing. New wreckage gets nailed to it most years, sometimes more than once in a single season, added by riders who survived crashes serious enough to total their bikes and wanted a place to put the wreckage besides a scrapyard. Nobody organizes it, nobody has to. It fills itself, one crash at a time, the way it has since the 1980s. A blunter monument than any official statistic to the same math this video just walked you through. 27 dead here, 23 dead, across the other 1,100 miles of the county combined. And it will probably keep filling for as long as the 11 miles behind it keep drawing riders who believe, the way almost everyone does right up until the moment they don't, that they are the exception. If you ever find yourself at the base of that road, throttle in hand or hands on the wheel, 318 curves ahead of you, remember what you now know that most first-time visitors don't. This road was never built for you to prove something on. It was built by an aluminum company to move equipment past a railroad its own dam had just flooded nearly a century ago, cut into a mountainside that gave its engineers no other choice. Every blind curve, every off-camber turn, every stretch of shaded, damp pavement that has claimed a rider was already there in 1931, long before anyone called it the Dragon. Long before there was a shop selling t-shirts or a tree collecting wreckage. The road has never once adjusted its terms for anyone, and there's no evidence it ever will. Tell us in the comments if you've ridden it, and if you made it out the way you planned.